This is a special presentation of Dog Nation, unmatched coverage of UGA in the postseason. Brought to you by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, Royal Caribbean, and Georgia Farm Bureau.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in. We've got some breaking news here. The Georgia Bulldogs landing a commitment out of the transfer portal this time. The first time the sort of roster cycle, Vanderbilt wide receiver London Humphreys announced his commitment to Georgia. This is a guy that Georgia had pretty clearly targeted from the jump out of the transfer portal. Humphreys will have 3 years of eligibility here left. Our coverage today presented by our friends at R.S. Andrews. But before we get into that, Jeff, you were on this from the jump. You have the commitment story up at dognation.com. What is Georgia getting in wide receiver London Humphreys?
So I think, Connor, you're going to keep up with this far better than probably anybody else on our team. If the scoreboard for the transfer portal now reads Georgia has one, is it like 14-1? Is it 15-1 with scholarship guys? Like Georgia's finally got one on the board, right?
It is 15-1 in terms of scholarship guys.
So here's what this one brings. First of all, there's a connection there with Andre Evans, the top 100 cornerback. Those two guys raced in track together. Andre usually won. Probably because he's about maybe 20 pounds or maybe like 15 pounds lighter. London is a guy, I think the beat core will probably have mixed emotions about this. He doesn't like the spotlight. He's not a flashy guy. I think it's an accurate but kind of a lazy comparison to just say he's a 6'3" Lad McConkey. Everybody uses it though, except Lad's got a mullet this time, and really just an explosive athlete. This was a guy that was a soccer player, a center fielder. He was a track guy. He played baseball. He did about everything but play football. And finally, he was kind of cajoled into going out for his junior year. And he's 6'3", 175 at the time. He has a near 40-inch vert. He has an 11-foot plus broad jump. This was all in high school. And he went and ran track, guys, and he was running like 10.6s when he didn't really run track. He just worked on starts and came over from the baseball team. And now you're looking at Georgia wide receiver-wise. They see him as a Z. And this is a guy that's really just going to put his head down and go. I think he's a guy that's going to absorb everything he can get at Georgia. Really, his decision came down to me. The way he articulated it to me is he wanted to play against the best players in the country every day, and he wanted to be developed. Another great part of his backstory, guys, I find fascinating, even for all these guys that come into Georgia. His mother was an All-American decathlon, probably heptathlon is what it's called now, at South Carolina. And his dad was an All-American pole vaulter at Auburn. So you got that DNA and you got that genetics. And I think he's a guy that's going to make Carson Beck very, very happy in 2024.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence to me that this commitment comes after Beck announces that he's returning to Georgia for another year. As Jeff points out, this is the first portal commitment. Georgia has seen 15 scholarship players enter. And I have a feeling this isn't going to be the last portal commitment that we see from Georgia here. They've pushed this wide receiver position before. They took 2 last year in Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett. They are planning on taking at least 2 again. Humphrey's the first one locked down there. Brandon, I go to you next here. What do you make of this commitment for Georgia? I know there are a lot of people making the exciting whites joke on Twitter right now when it comes to landing London Humphreys, but I think this is a big-time ad, a guy that's got 3 years of eligibility left, and as we saw against Georgia, had a 49-yard touchdown against them. It's not like he's beating up on UNLV and Central Connecticut State of the world.
Admittedly, I am a fan of that meme. I will confess that. But then beyond that, I was going to say this as I try to get my face to fit in the screen here. A lot of Georgia fans are wondering, okay, what does this mean? How do you process this? I'll tell you personally how I process this. This was the second most productive freshman receiver in the entire SEC here this year. That, I was kind of looking at this when Zeke Haynes left Georgia about, we have these memories of like the freshman receivers who come in and really thrive in the SEC. And that obscures the overall point, which is that wide receiver is actually a pretty strong developmental position in the SEC. You don't see a lot of freshmen thrive. And so between Humphreys and also Wilson in Florida, Eugene Wilson in Florida, those are about the most productive freshman receivers in the league. So when you think about what Georgia's getting here, it's getting a rare young guy who is able to play right away. And yes, I know it's at Vanderbilt, but if anything, I think those receiving yards at a place like Vanderbilt and a team that wasn't good, those receiving yards mean even more in that situation. So I can tell you that I think that Georgia fans ought to have been very happy to have Ra Thomas this year, very happy to have Dominic Lovett this year. The idea of getting SEC experience at the receiver position through the transfer portal, I think that's kind of working for Georgia. And I think in a case of Humphreys, who could be here for a while, but is also just a good, young, talented player who's, having a rare level of success as a freshman in this league, I think there's a lot to like about this. And, if you care about like some of the national websites that, rank transfers and things like that, 24/7 Sports had Humphreys rated a lot higher on their available transfers list than, for instance, Julian Fleming, who's, I think, a lot more acquainted with a lot of us from a recruiting standpoint because he was a much higher rated recruit. But as a transfer, there are plenty of these like national outlets that have ranked Humphreys ahead of Julian Fleming, to give you an idea how productive London Humphreys was in his first year there at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and I'll go to you next here, Mike. With Georgia obviously bringing in London Humphreys, it's an addition geared towards next year, a guy that I think can come in and help right away. But this is a Georgia passing offense that is going to look different. Brock Bowers comes out and says today he's unsure of whether he's going to play in the Orange Bowl and what his draft plans are. I think just about everyone watching this understands that Brock Bowers has played his last meaningful down for Georgia. We'll see what he does in the Orange Bowl there. But Ladd McConkey has an NFL decision to make. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint has an NFL decision to make. Would not surprise me to see more transfer guys. What does Humphreys' addition do to this wide receiver room for next year?
Well, this is a guy, I think Georgia was his best game yardage-wise against an SEC team. He had 51 yards, but obviously Kirby Smart likes the size and likes what he did against Georgia. And, let's face it, he didn't have a guy like Carson Beck throwing him the football. I mean, Jeff has certainly done his due diligence on the background of this young man. And, this is going to be a capable guy that wants to come in, that wants the smoke, as we say. We've said before that Georgia's not for everybody, and you better make a decision because you're going to be fighting against some of the best. It's going to be physical and it's going to be hard and nothing's going to be given. But obviously Georgia likes this guy as a prospect, and he does have good size and good speed and good athleticism, and certainly the toughness will be tested when he gets here. I'll say this, reading the tea leaves, this Carson Beck decision, not just the fact that Carson came back, but the fact that he made this decision before the Orange Bowl, I think gives Georgia a chance to bring back more guys than maybe I thought they were going to bring back. I'm hearing Tate Ratledge is leaning towards a return, and maybe Ladd McConkey's not completely 100%. And it's a combination, guys, of maybe the Georgia players aren't hearing exactly what they want to hear, much like Carson, not hearing exactly what they want to hear from the NFL, and suddenly coming back to Georgia for another year where you can be compensated, but more importantly, have a chance to maybe take care of some unfinished business. Look, these guys have worked hard to become the best Georgia program in the history of the school. This last run, these last 3 years, it's unmatched, it's unparalleled, and it tastes good, right? And there's a part of me that wonders if there's a bit of unfinished business for some of these other guys that maybe we wrote off. There was some early talk Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint was leaving. I'm not saying he's coming back, but now maybe they think a little bit more with this Carson Beck decision coming this early. The guys are going to meetings. They're starting to get geared up for the Orange Bowl. There's a lot of positive momentum, Connor. And I think adding this Vanderbilt player to the mix makes people look around and say, you know what? Georgia might have something really special next year if a couple more of these dominoes fall.
Yeah, so London Humphreys, the first big transfer portal addition for Georgia here out of the portal. Played at Vanderbilt last year, as we saw last season in the transfer portal. All of their players came from SEC schools. This is the third wide receiver to come out of the transfer portal here in recent years, in the last 2 years for Georgia. Before I get to you there, Jeff, and I ask you about what impact that has, do you think, on high school recruiting, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Kroger. Kroger is a proud partner of the Georgia Bulldogs and have all your tailgating needs covered. Tailgate with fan favorites, including chips, beer, hamburgers, and hot dogs for the grill, and so much more. Visit Kroger.com/football for more game day deals or your local Kroger location. So, Jeff, National Signing Day or early signing day, it starts tomorrow. Assuming that Humphreys gets announced, that means Kirby Smart can actually talk about him, and thus we get some more intel on him from what they like from that standpoint. But Georgia's only bringing in 2 wide receivers from the high school ranks this year, and there are some high-profile misses that were in this class, and that's even considering Dylan Raiola was committed for a large portion of this cycle here. I'm not saying it's an issue. I'm not saying it's a problem, but with 3 right now transfer wide receivers in the last 2 years, potentially a fourth, there are a couple guys out there. A Michigan State wide receiver was visiting over the weekend. Colby Young from Miami, another name to know there. What kind of impact do you think the transfer portal is having on the wide receiver position at Georgia, both from a portal standpoint, but also from a high school recruiting standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm going to kind of just lay it bare. I think Sokovia White was an athlete, more of a 3-star athlete. Georgia found really early. You can even say that for Nitro Showtime Tuggle. Georgia found him really early, and then his rankings kind of blew up. There's kind of a standard here now. If you're a top 10 wide receiver, if you're a near 5-star wide receiver, you're going to draw hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the collective. And I just don't think that's a game Georgia wants to be in. I think they want to work. They want to work the transfer portal. According to my math, now I was a journalism major, not a math major, but
dangerous game.
Dangerous game. But you can put like Georgia's transfer portal receivers last year, Dominic Lovett, Ra Thomas, and I think you can put both of those together and maybe get those 2 proven SEC players, 19, 20 years old, out of the portal for about as much as it would. Not so bargain shopping to get a 5-star high school receiver. Some of these numbers are getting astronomical. So I just think Georgia's going to become a program for those elite guys. They're going to get their receivers out of the transfer portal. And really, it's not too much of a projection to think about Georgia next year against Clemson and see Carson Beck scanning the field and him potentially having, except for maybe Dylan Bell, all transfer portal receivers out there. I don't think that's going to be an aberration. I think that's going to be the norm.
And Connor, can I jump in on this for a second? Because this is something you and I have talked about a couple times before. And, I have to say that I don't find myself all that alarmed by the current situation here, because I would say that what Georgia's doing offensively is working. Statistically productive, production-wise, I like what I'm seeing. Now, if you're going to be alarmed by, kind of the blue chip talent where it's kind of not coming in and what you're not getting, I think that's more about defensive front seven type stuff. Right now it's defensive linemen because, this wasn't the same kind of defensive line here this year for Georgia. I'd say, the big issue is the sort of elite edge rusher type. If I'm going to sound an alarm about an area in which I believe that Georgia probably needs a dramatic upgrade, both in terms of who it's bringing in and what those guys are doing once they get here, it might be more along the lines of kind of like the traditional pass rusher, the edge rusher type. But I can tolerate what Georgia's doing with the kind of, less heralded SEC transfer as opposed to like the Jeremiah Smith, Mike Matthews, guys like that, because, production wise, I like the overall results for the Georgia offense, even if it's not coming with, future first round picks at the wide receiver position.
And Mike, I'll throw to you here shortly. I think when you watch that Alabama game, you go back, you see Georgia struggled to create separation downfield. They struggled to get guys open. Now, Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Georgia's 2 best pass catchers, were dinged up in that game. But injuries, I think, are a factor, and that's something you have to consider there. What do you make of the talent in this wide receiver room for Georgia going into the 2024 season? Does Carson Beck, in your opinion right now, have enough around him to make Georgia a national title level team?
Not yet, but I don't think they're done. In fact, I know they're not done. And, it's interesting. I was thinking about the transfer guys this year, Lovett in the slot, maybe not as explosive as we thought, certainly disappointing. Ra got hurt. Nothing he could do about that. But when it was time for next man up, you had 2 catches for 23 yards out of Lovett in the SEC title game. And they're going to need more from Lovett next year. They're going to need more talent, Connor. And I think Georgia's going to get it. I think back to Lawrence Cager, just kind of comparing this Vanderbilt guy. Lawrence was a veteran who had some injuries at Miami, but the big target who came through. And I think Kirby's done a nice job with the kind of kids he's brought in. They know what they're in for. They know that blocking's going to be part of the job. They understand that a Georgia receiver has to do a little bit more than, maybe some of these, type of high dollar receivers like Jeff's describing, right? I don't want to use the word prima donna, but there does seem to be a different set of receivers out there that maybe don't want to come and do the team thing first. And at Georgia really do have to be all in. But I don't think Georgia's done. And when I say that, I don't just mean at receiver. I think Etienne is a guy we've got to continue to talk about in the receiving game. I thought one of the things Georgia really missed this year that they've had was those great pass-catching backs, and certainly those that play fantasy football are well aware of the impact James Cook is having in the NFL, and you go, wow, that guy played behind Zamir White. Yes, he was on the roster for 4 years, did make major contributions, though, in the championship games. Can you get a game-changing running back? I'm with Brandon. The pass rush is what it is. I just wrote a story. They were 10th in the SEC in sacks. That's not acceptable. Shouldn't happen. I don't know what's out there in the portal on that side of the ball. That's probably a Centel's intel question. But in terms of offensive firepower, I think ETN is a domino that needs to fall to give you that immediate dynamic threat catching the ball out of the backfield.
Right, and running back is obviously a position to watch here for Georgia, assuming Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards both turn pro after the season. I know they're set to sign 3 running backs in this 2024 recruiting class, but you look at the guys they have already on campus. Branson Robinson with the patella tendon injury, you can't really say you have anything clear at that position. Andrew Paul will be his second year post ACL, and he did do some nice things late in the season there. And then Roderick Robinson dealt with an ankle injury at times this year. We'll see what happens there with him. But back to the big news. London Humphreys, Vanderbilt wide receiver, commits to the University of Georgia. Big 6'3" addition. As Brandon Adams points out, second this year among freshman wide receivers in the SEC in terms of yardage there. 3 years of eligibility left. And so spinning this ahead, so far from the transfer portal, we've seen Georgia go after a certain type of guy. All have SEC backgrounds. Now, obviously, that might change here in this cycle, but obviously last cycle, they brought in 3 SEC guys here. It's important to know, I would say, I think you can classify Lovett and Thomas as hits. They were certainly contributors this year. Obviously, Thomas's injury at the end of the year had an impact in terms of what he was able to bring, but they were successful additions. But then you look at like a guy like Smoke Bowie, who never made it onto the field, or even a guy like Tyke Smith, who was an all-SEC level player this year for Georgia, but it took him 3 years in the program to get to that level. And I think when you look at the guys that Georgia has gone after more often than not, they're not targeting those one and done types for the most part. They're looking at guys because they understand that it's going to take some time for them to get adjusted and acclimated here. I'm sure Kirby has done research on this. You certainly see it at the quarterback position, but when guys transfer in, it's that second year that you really see that massive leap there. So I think we can even look at London Humphreys. While there are expectations for him to go out there and produce early this season, you wonder if maybe what you see year 2 out of Dominic Lovett and year 2 out of Ra Thomas is maybe the transfer portal strategy that Georgia is going to continue to employ going forward there.
And I'd also say this, and I don't want to oversell this. I don't think that London Humphrey is going to be like a first-round pick necessarily, anything like that. But compare him to like a 5-star receiver in this class that I absolutely love. And I love Mike Matthews. I mean, I've seen him play in person many times. I've had a chance to talk with him, talk to people who know him. I think there's a lot to like about a guy like Mike Matthews who's going to Tennessee. But I'll give you a slight hot take that I believe that this upcoming season in 2024, London Humphreys will have more receiving yards for Georgia than Mike Matthews will for Tennessee.
I like that. I like that a lot. And again, I'm right there with you in terms of liking what Matthews is potentially able to bring there. And Georgia's had successful freshman wide receivers in the past. And it wouldn't surprise me if maybe a Nitro Tuggle comes in and goes out and plays well. And I guess we'll use that here maybe to talk a little bit about these 2 wide receivers. And I'll throw it back to you here, Jeff. What is Georgia getting? I know you've seen Sokovie White a bunch. I know you've talked to Nitro Tuggle a bunch. What is Georgia getting in Nitro Tuggle and Sokovie White?
Nitro's that guy that he's very big and athletic, and you're like, he does things at 6'2" plus that maybe a 5'11" guy would. It was very interesting. That was I would say a commitment that was shaky at times. It's kind of funny. Maybe the last really strong update I got from one of the last strong updates I got from about Nitro Tuggle was I think, Connor, you said earlier that for all of the grandeur and the hype of having the 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola, there sure weren't a lot of 5-star receivers that wound up following him and wanting to play with him. But one of the things Dylan always told me is he felt Nitro was really strong in the class, especially when he came back for the Ole Miss game. He kind of locked back in with the class. He sat with Dylan and Sokovie, kind of sat together with Nitro for maybe the third quarter of that game. And, Nitro's a guy that Georgia got him, and he was probably number 400, number 600 in the country. But then he started going to camps. It was a great early eval for Brian McClendon. And really the one thing we know about McClendon and his receivers is you better be able to run. You better be able to separate. You better be able to put your foot in the ground and go. That's what McClendon wanted when he was recruiting guys like McCole Hardman, when he was going after guys like Grant Holloway in his first stop at Georgia. Grant Holloway went on to become a great Hall of Fame track guy at Florida, challenging in the Olympics now, world record holder in the 400-meter hurdles. But you got to be really fast to play for BMAC. That was kind of the characteristic last year with Anthony Evans III, and then Zede Haynes now at Syracuse. But you want guys that can run really fast. And then Sokovia, man, I just think he's a special football player. Every year, I think the term football player needs to get used a lot for like the best overall football player in the class. And I think that might be Sokovia in this class because he wants to play some receiver. He wants to do returns. He sees himself. He's been told by BMAC that he's a slot guy. He's already in practice in Athens right now, going through early bowl practices, already going to church with his Georgia teammates, Justin Williams and Joseph Jonah Ajanye on Sunday. But he's a guy that is really – he's going to be special for a lot of ways. I mean, Sokovia played safety, played corner, played nickel slot corner for his high school team. He still fancies himself wanting to play defensive backs too because he likes that physical part of the game. I think Sokovia, pound for pound, is probably going to be the strongest wide receiver in the Georgia room. He's going to be about 5'9", about 185 pounds, but he's going to have benches over 300, power cleans right at 300, big-time squat. Just a strong, very physical, well-developed guy that's kind of going to be like maybe 2 clips above what Georgia had with Mekhi Muse, that sort of do-it-all kind of slot receiver type. And then Nitro's just a game breaker. He's a guy that I think it might take him a year or two to really start flapping his wings and really soar at Georgia. But Nitro's a guy, they call him Showtime for good reason. He's got a flair for the dramatic. Was really hoping he would have gotten down to IMG Academy to play this year, but he wasn't allowed to do so. And now he's, after some really late worries a lot of people had, was he going to take NIL offers? Was he going to go to Notre Dame? Was he going to flip to Michigan, LSU? There was talk of an official visit, but then LSU felt really good about its receivers where they didn't need to give Nitro an official visit. And as it stands right now, I don't think there's a lot of drama around Nitro, but that would be the second high school receiver in the class for Georgia. But like I said earlier, Connor, I think Georgia's future at receiver is going to be maybe 1 or 2 kind of gems they find, kind of like in the Ladd McConkey mold, and they kind of develop and they kind of claim first, and they kind of the kid falls in love with being a Bulldog. But I think they're going to look to get a lot of their kind of premier guys out of the portal now.
Yeah.
I would also add this about Sokovia White. I know that sometimes player comparisons can be lazy. Sokovia White is Kearis Jackson. Like, they are literally the same person. Like, physical, strong, future team captain, maybe not the fastest guy in the world. Like, everything you liked about Kearis Jackson, that's what Sokovia White is. Certain things that you wish were different about Kearis, you'll probably think the same thing about Sokovia White. I don't know that there is a more perfect player comp than Sokovia White and Kearis Jackson. To me, and I mean this in a certainly very complimentary sense, they are very, very close to being the same person.
So yesterday we had BA at what looked like a baseball park. Today we've got him on the side of the road. It's just that time of year where you never know what's going to happen. Obviously, we have breaking news here. Georgia lands a commitment from London Humphreys. And before we wrap up, say our final words here, I'd like to thank our friends at RS Andrews. Dog Nation depends on RS Andrews. AC heating, plumbing, and electric. You call, they come. It's fixed, guaranteed. That's because the RS in RS Andrews stands for rapid service. Take water heaters. RS Andrews makes it easy. Call in the morning, and RS Andrews will take it out and install a new water heater the same day. That's rapid service. That's RS Andrews. Same-day water heater replacement. Another reason why Dog Nation depends on RS Andrews. And how can that not make you smile? Visit rsandrews.com today. So wrapping it up there, final thoughts, Jeff. What is Georgia getting in London Humphreys here?
I'll give you a final thought from my interview with London Humphreys today. He said it just felt like where I wanted to be and where I could become the best version of myself. I can't wait for Brandon Adams to talk about how I needed 150 yards to get close to breaking the 1,000-yard mark for the Georgia football single season record. I'm just kidding about that last part. There was a clear break there, but he's going to be fun. And really, guys, this was the backstory on this was probably pretty much done. You know how most folks say that when you hop in the portal, you have a pretty good idea where you'd like to wind up. I think Georgia was a place where he wanted to wind up. It was basically between Georgia, LSU. We just mentioned that LSU was pretty good with receivers as they kind of brushed off Nitro Showtime Tuggle from taking a late official. And really, he got to Georgia really quickly. Had the official visit. He actually stayed an additional day, the third day, more than the normal. He got to hang out, got to go downtown, got to see what the Athens scene was like. And if he didn't need any more cajoling or interest in that. Athens is always undefeated in that area. And then it happened quick, and then it came out of it. And I think what you saw here with a lot of delay, I must admit, we are all in the media business, but guys, it looked like the media business was falling over each other every 3 days to tell everybody, this guy's coming, but he's not coming yet. It's not announced yet. He's still coming. It's not announced yet. Everybody wants to get out there with their news breakers and be breaking and have everything else. But I think a lot of paperwork issues had to be dotted. I's had to be dotted. T's had to be crossed, Georgia's side and even London's side before this all became real.
BA, as the sort of carnival barker for Dog Nation, is this the good news you were at last looking for here heading into National Signing Day?
It is, and I think the good news is the operative phrase here. Carson Beck coming back in 2024, that's great news. That's the kind of thing that you can make a whole day out of. London Humphreys, by comparison, seems like it's smaller news, but folks got to understand, a football team is made up of 85 scholarship players. It's a lot of good news added together that adds up to a deep roster that gives you a chance to win the kind of games that Georgia's going to be playing in 2024. So I think having a category for good news, not like national headline, eye-popping great news, but just getting better by adding a player that can clearly help you. That's what Georgia's done here with London Humphreys. There's something to be said for good news that makes you better, and that's what London Humphreys is. I don't know that people are doing dramatic backflips over this necessarily, but the fist pump, the high five, the smile, I think that's an appropriate response here when Georgia adds a player that's already shown you can handle business in the SEC, that this is not a league that's too big for him. He's already been somewhat productive on his first year on campus, and I think that gives him at least a possibility of a very bright future here at UGA.
And Mike, I'll go to you here. Georgia famously didn't take anyone out of the transfer portal before that 2022 team, but I think in adding London Humphreys, they clearly got better today.
Oh, no question. And, 30 years into this, you kind of pick up trends on programs. And as Brandon said, what a difference the last 24 hours has made. And I kind of remember leaving the SEC championship game in 2019 after LSU had laid waste to a Georgia team that was kind of in a rebuild mode. And Jake Fromm doing the best he could with a receiving core that was, as Kirby Smart called it, a carousel of receivers. And I just thought, the news that Sam Pittman was leaving, and I thought, oh boy, this is tough. Boy, where is Georgia going to go now? How do they pick up the pieces? And I was having that thought about this program over the last week with more and more guys entering the portal and waiting to hear the news on Carson Beck. And is he going to hold out until after the bowl game? And now Carson's made this decision, and the shift in energy is unmistakable. The people that I'm talking to in the Georgia community, the parents of the players that some people think are far gone, now suddenly there's going to be more conversations in those families. Seeing Kirby's ability to get it done with Beck. This wasn't easy. Carson set the bar. He was the premier free agent quarterback out there. I mean, this is a guy who could be playing in the NFL next year that's going to be leading the Georgia Bulldogs. And I can tell you they're not done yet. There's going to be more transfers, and Kirby's not stopping with teams that aren't in the playoffs. I'll just say keep your ear to the ground. Connor's done an unbelievable job on dognation.com with all these portal entries. And now we're starting to see the players that are coming. It's going to be an exciting signing day. I know Jeff's all over that. We've got tons of previews coming up, a lot of exciting freshmen coming in. But this free agency game, Connor, it's starting to get a little fun now. And I think there's going to be a few more exciting names in the mix before it's over with.
Yep, and so obviously early signing period starts tomorrow. We're going to have wall-to-wall coverage, Brandon Adams in the morning, Jeff Sentell to recap everything with Before the Hedges at the end of the day, and we're going to have a little programming there in the afternoon as well, so make sure to stay tuned to Dog Nation for that. For Brandon Adams, who is hopefully on his way, Jeff Sentell, Mike Griffith, my name is Connor Riley. Georgia lands a transfer wide receiver, London Humphreys from Vanderbilt, the first transfer portal edition for this cycle, and most likely not going to be the last one. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.